Hi, welcome to Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. My name is George Ortega, and this is episode number 146, No Free Will Off the Cuff number 10. Okay, we've done 9 of these before. This is the 10th one, and in these episodes I just talk whatever comes into my mind. It's a good way of kind of like describing, why we don't have free will, because I have no idea what I'm going to say before I say it and all. But anyway, we're taping this on October 21st, 2013, and we just finished a 6-part series on an article Roy Baumeister published in Slate.com. So anyway, yeah, I needed a break from that. All right, all right, here's the thing. What I want to talk about. I'm not going to really talk so much about why we don't have a free will, because, there's 145 episodes where I do that. I mean, I might do it a little, but I want to talk about what this means, because, I ended the last show by kind of like mentioning that, a lot of the reason people don't understand this or can't understand it is because, they've got these psychological reasons, barriers, this motivated reasoning that doesn't allow them to. So I'm going to try to I'm going to see if I can come up with some ways to explain why this is so important, because this is a very important topic. Might as well start with the first 100 episodes of the show. I started with a quote by this philosopher John Searle, he's not just any philosopher. This guy's like the 14th ranked philosopher in the world of philosophers born after 1900, okay? Now, he happens to believe in free will, so, he's not such a keenly intellectual philosopher in a way, but he gets this. What he said was that, he was asked, this psychologist, this British psychologist, Susan Blackmore, wrote a book that she published in 2005 called Conversations on Consciousness. And she asked, she interviewed a lot of thinkers about consciousness. And it was about free will also. So she asked Searle, for this book, if the world were to come to understand that free will is an illusion, what would that mean? That was essentially her question. And Searle said, well, that would be a bigger revolution in our thinking than Einstein or Copernicus or Newton or Galileo or Darwin. Then he goes on to say, it would alter our whole conception of our relation with the universe. That is how big this is. Overcoming free will, this illusion of free will, amounts to nothing less than constructing an entire, well, not entire, but a fundamentally new consciousness. Can you understand that? Can you appreciate the difference between going around thinking that stuff is actually up to us when absolutely nothing is up to us? A good way to explain this, because sometimes people don't understand, what the term free will means. Sometimes people believe it refers to political freedom. That if you have free will, if your government allows you to do certain things. That's not free will. That's political freedom, right? I think the best way to understand what this whole free will thing is about is not having free will, which is the truth, which is what this show is about, means that we don't have any more control over anything that we do, think, feel, say, over anything that happens than does a puppet. Okay, that's the reality. And now, if you appreciate that, then you can appreciate why John Searle said why. Why do you think Searle said what he said? All right, because basically, he's using these top scientists. I don't think when he made the statement, I don't think he picked these out, singularly to say that free will is a bigger revolution than them. I think he's basically picking them out because these are, the Copernican revolution, Newton, Einstein. These are the top revolutionaries in terms of our understanding of the world in the world. So basically he was saying this is the biggest revolution in our thinking ever. That's why he cites these five major thinkers, Darwin, my God. So this is the biggest revolution in our thinking ever. Why do we need this? Because again, I don't know what I'm going to say before I say it, but I'm being destined to talk about this. And I don't want to get too heavy and all, but like, all right, we've got, climate change. If the world is going to be around for 20, 30, 40, 100 years, if a comet or an asteroid doesn't smash us to smithereens, whatever, if we're going to be around, we're going to be facing climate change. And climate change, we haven't yet, garnered the political will to even begin to address it. For example, 20% of the greenhouse gases that go up into the atmosphere each year that makes climate change worse, much worse, about 20%, comes from the livestock industry, comes from our eating animals, So like, eventually we're going to have to stop eating the animals, we're going to have to do a lot more. Basically what I'm trying to say is like, we can like go into this climate crisis that we're going to be experiencing, and it's going to be getting worse and worse, unfortunately. This is like, the hurricanes are going to be stronger, there's going to be more wildfires, there are going to be more tornadoes, just a lot of the disease vectors. What happens is, like, with a lot of like microbes, microorganisms, organisms that sometimes infect us and all, you raise the level of the temperature in a certain region by a few degrees Fahrenheit, whatever, and that would mean that these organisms may have, like, instead of one breeding season per year, they may have 2 or 3. Meaning that these kinds of, like, our world is going to be undergoing a major crisis, existential crisis. Our entire civilization is at risk, and we can go into this with the free will perspective, but to the extent we do that, what we end up doing is we blame each other. China's going to blame us because we're responsible. The United States is 5% of the world's population, but we are responsible for about 25% of the climate change, the greenhouse gases that are already up there, okay? China just recently caught up to us on a yearly, release of greenhouse gases. They're now releasing a bit more each year than we are, but like, we've been releasing a lot more for many more years than they have because we're much more developed. So we're going to be blaming, countries are going to be blaming each other. People are going to be blaming each other. The people are going to be blaming the rich, the oil companies, the energy companies, the politicians who are doing nothing. That's our tendency. That's what free will invites, that's what it compels. And to the extent we go into these next decades with that kind of perspective, one of the major dangers of climate change doesn't come from the climate per se. It comes from the geopolitical implications of what it means. In other words, if there's a certain region where they're not getting enough rain, because of climate change, because the climate change changes the rainfall patterns, and they become much poorer and they start dying, and they may blame us. Let's say they start blaming us that the United States and the other rich countries pretty much caused this climate catastrophe, and they're the ones who are dying first from it, because a lot of the most extreme conditions are going to be going on in Africa, in the tropics in a lot of cases. So, so they're going to be blaming us. And, like, we've got this problem with terrorism. I mean, like, climate change would be something that would exacerbate that tremendously. The idea is, like, we can go through what we need to do to adapt to and mitigate climate change from a free will perspective, but if we do that, there's going to be so much more animosity, hatred, blame, vengeance, revenge, so much of what this free will illusion compels and necessitates. It's a logical, to many people, it's just logical that if somebody's to blame for something, then they're wrong, they're evil, they deserve to be punished. So that's the mindset that we have now. And fine, we've lived, well enough, so to speak, with this mindset, for however long civilization's been around. But this climate change challenge is going to be just categorically different. All right, so the idea is, to the extent that we can overcome this illusion. And here's the thing: fine, the effects of climate change, we may not be feeling very severe effects for another 10, 20, 30 years. Who knows? I mean, we may have more Katrinas, we may have more Sandys, we may have, there was a cyclone that hit, I think, Indonesia in 2004, killed 400,000 people. These storms can be horrifically devastating. So overcoming the illusion of free will is not something that's going to happen overnight, because first we have to learn that we don't have a free will. Then we've got to integrate that learning. In other words, I've been working on this concept for years, and especially over the last 3 years. And it's one thing to know that we don't have a free will. It's another thing to behave according to that understanding, to not judge, to not hold people responsible, especially when emotions get kicked in. If I'm yeah, whatever, that could so anyway, what I'm trying to say is it's going to take time. It's going to take, years for us to go from learning and accepting that we don't have a free will to integrating that mindset, into our behavior, into the way we treat each other as individuals and the way we treat each other as societies, as groups of people, and the way we treat each other as countries. Because if we can get on board on this and transform, our psyches, transform how we view the world, then yes, it's not going to be pleasant in a lot of ways, but at least we'll be in it together. Instead of us fighting each other, blaming each other, this is because of what you did, and this is because of what you didn't do, and all. We'll all understand, hey, what happened was unavoidable. It wasn't up to us. There was absolutely nothing we could have done to prevent it. And that's the truth. That's what not having a free will means, all right? But that would bring us together. That would all of a sudden we're not blaming each other. What would happen? We would better get on with the tasks that we need to do to best adapt to the changes that need to be done, and to best to mitigate it. In other words, we're going to have to, I just read an article in the Times last night saying that that there's some people creating these new food companies to create new kinds of food products, because by 2050 our population is going to go from, I think, the 7 billion we have now, not sure, to over 9 billion. And then the article is saying in 2050 we're not going to have enough food to feed all these people. I was amazed that's such bad journalism. You know why? Because we can have more than enough food to feed 9 billion, to feed 10 billion, 11 billion, 12 billion. And here's why. Much of the food we consume is animal food, like beef, poultry, pork. Okay? And what happens is in order to produce a pound of, let's say, beef, a pound of cow, you've got to feed that cow with about 12 pounds, not 12, but around 10 pounds of plant protein. In other words, you got to have to feed that cow 10 pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of beef protein. All right? And again, I think I mentioned before that 20% of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere comes from the livestock industry. These cows produce methane. That methane converts to CO2, and that kind of like contributes to the greenhouse gases. We're going to have to stop eating animals. That's we're going to have to like go to a food-based, to a plant-based diet, and that's not going to be bad. That's actually going to be healthy. I'm a vegan. There's a lot of vegetarians. It's a much healthier lifestyle. It's much less heart disease, much less disease associated with it, because the animal eat. And the other part of it is like, with animals, it's like the way we treat them in these factory farms. It's horrible. And so like, how does this relate to the free will thing? It's like, it's so horrible. Remember I'm talking about the motivated reasoning, why we can't face sometimes truths that kind of like attack who we think we are. So we like to think of ourselves as good people, but if we think we have a free will and we're faced with the fact that we're actually torturing these animals, we can't face that fact, because if we faced that fact, we would have to like face the fact that we're doing it to them, freely. All right? So like, how does overcoming the illusion of free will factor into this? To the extent that we don't blame ourselves for how we're treating the animals, we can look at what we're doing, what the universe is making us do to them, through a clearer lens, without the guilt, without the self-attribution, and maybe through that clearer lens, maybe we'll be able to see what we're doing to them clearly enough to stop doing it, to stop the torture. Because I'm telling you, it's like, you think we're living in a civilized, good world. This world is probably more horrible than at any time in history, because like there's about 60 billion animals each year that go through this, factory farms, the fish farms where they're like, anyway, so yeah, the idea is like, to the extent that we overcome the free will belief, we can address this very serious, heinous crime we're doing against other animals, other life forms, and that would be helping out. Again, 20% of climate change is a result of these the livestock industry. I think it's more than that, because like, this show is about understanding that we don't have a free will, but I never say that like that we don't get rewarded or punished even though we don't have free will. In other words, like, the universe will compel us to do good things, and then the universe seems to reward us. We work hard, we abide by the law, we treat people well, we do good things. The universe seems to reward us for those things, even though we had no choice but to do them. But then the inverse is also true. Like, when we do bad things, the universe will tend to punish us. And sometimes people don't connect the dots. In other words, like in 1940s, we went through this World War II. I don't know how many million people died. I think 50 million, perhaps more. What happens is, like, sometimes, with slavery, another thing, we may be suffering the effects of enslaving Africans for 400 years. With this climate change thing and all. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, like, just as like we're compelled to do good and the universe will reward us in certain ways, we're also compelled to do evil and the universe will punish us in certain ways. So in other words, like with the way we're treating these farm animals, even though it's not up to us, we might be very wise to stop torturing them. Just because, not because, recognizing we don't have free will, but like to do it from the perspective that it's in our interest to stop torturing them, so we don't get punished by this universe or this God, or whatever you want to call whatever is running the show. That does tend to reward and punish us according to however unfair it is, it makes us do. Okay. There's more to it, like the free will belief, it's insidious. There's over 1 billion people living on less than $1 a day. You know, they die at a rate of about 30,000 kids under 5 die every day from this like preventable poverty. It's poverty, but it's preventable. And one of the reasons that we don't help these poor countries to feed their people and to give their people adequate health care is because of this free will belief. You know, a lot of people will say, well, you know, it's their parents' fault for having them. You know, their parents shouldn't be having kids they can't feed. So in other words, look, we attribute free will to their parents and end up like, you know, indifferently, very cruelly watching their kids die. It's more harmful than that, actually. In other words, like we're in the United States and a lot of the rich countries, we're rich to a great extent because we keep a lot of countries poor. A lot of these African countries could overcome their poverty if we and the other rich countries allowed them to trade with us. You know, we have these trade treaties, these tariffs, these taxes and trade agreements with countries, but very often we will grant, for example, our more rich trading partners better deals. We'll tax them less than we'll tax the poor countries. We'll give them, you know, better prices for their products. So in a certain sense, yeah, we keep these countries poor. And again, like taking it back to the free will issue, we're kind of blaming them. We're blaming, you know, like they you know, somehow they're doing something wrong. And without the free will illusion, we wouldn't blame them. We'd understand that they're people that are in great need. I mean, you know, over 1 billion people living on less than $1 a day, 30,000 kids dying every day of poverty. It is, you know, I don't want to sound completely negative because, you know, I just learned in the New York Times recently, I was reading this article, they've actually perfected a malaria vaccine. Malaria kills a lot of these kids. You know, mosquitoes in the tropics, they carry the disease, and, you know, and it kills them. I think it also, you know, affects them in other ways, even if they live, blinds them, whatever. It's horrible. But anyway, I think so. They've perfected this vaccine, and it should be being used in Africa by 2016. So that's going to cut a lot of. That might reduce the amount of deaths each year. I think there's about 10 million people who die every year from preventable poverty. You know, it might reduce it to like 8 million or 7 million or something. Malaria does kill a lot of people. All right, so anyway, you know, overcoming the illusion of free will isn't an inconsequential matter. It's not a trivial pursuit. It's not something that is just like academic. It's not just knowledge for its own sake. It's very practical, real. It's important. It's important. In other words, like to address the challenges we're going to be facing from climate change, to maybe be able to like address how we're treating the animals and the poor, that maybe we kind of like our free will belief leads us to believe that we're responsible for. To be able to address these things more compassionately, more effectively, you know, in a spirit of cooperation rather than fighting and blaming and then, you know, getting punished by the universe for our crimes against humanity, crimes against other animals. You know, to the extent we're going to overcome this illusion of free will, we can see what we're doing through innocence. Because, you know, again, we'd have to acknowledge it's not our doing, it's the universe, it's God, whatever you want to call it, that's making us torture these animals, that's making us keep these poor countries poor and making us, like, you know, not end this poverty that's so easy to end. So, you know, we acknowledge that we kind of become ennobled in a sense by through this innocence. We don't see ourselves as guilty, but then, you know, through this clearer lens of not, you know, blaming ourselves, we can see, you know, that the things need to change. But again, I think the major factor will be that as climate change progresses over the years and decades, there's going to be more and more blame unless the free will illusion is overcome. You know, and you know the government is going to have to get involved in this. Business is going to have to get so far like the government, politics, and businesses, they like the status quo because it's serving them. But you know it's a great threat to the planet, and it's a great threat to them. They they don't realize it yet. So anyway, all right, I'm running out of time. This is my off the cuff number 10. I didn't realize I was going to get so involved. I want to do other shows on how this relates to our lives on a more personal level that aren't as heavy, aren't as dramatic. All right, well, all right, I hope, let's see, what else? Just some commercials. The show's on every Wednesday at 7:30 here in White Plains, every Thursday 9 o'clock. Then it's like, and you can, if you're not in White Plains, you can watch it on the internet. It's broadcast live. And then I upload the episodes to YouTube. And you can check out the site of the show, Exploring the Illusion of Free Will, causalconsciousness.com. We have another show in Manhattan that a lot of times it shows repeats of this show to the Manhattan audience. And like once a month or so, we go live. We take questions. It's called No Free Will. I think we're changing the name to Free Will with a question mark to hopefully attract more viewers. But that's a good show. Okay, I've got a book, Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. It's a Kindle version. It's $1. I mean, it's a great deal. And on the website especially, it's got links to a lot of articles in major media magazines: the New York Times, the Atlantic, Time Magazine, New Scientist, Scientific American, USA Today, magazines and newspapers that all refute free will. So check that out. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time on Exploring the Illusion of Free Will. Thanks.